Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a hidden world that honestly might just be multiplying behind your very walls right now. We're going to take a deep dive, going all the way from that terrifying moment of discovering hidden mold in a residential home, straight through to the strictly enforced, scientifically rigorous state laws that dictate exactly how to clean it up.
Just picture this. On the outside, you have this beautifully calm, sunny home in Winter Garden, Florida. It looks absolutely perfect, right? Well, fast forward to the inside. Tucked completely out of sight, right underneath the kitchen cabinets, is an absolute nightmare. It's a genuinely shocking contrast between a pristine exterior and the alarming microbial growth that's just silently creeping along in the dark.
So, how do professionals actually tackle a mess like this? Here's our roadmap for the explainer today. First, we'll go inside a mold inspection. Number 2, we're analyzing the lab results. Third, we'll look at the strict remediation protocols. And finally, we'll wrap up with state licensing requirements.
All right, let's dive right into Section 1, Inside a Mold Inspection, the case of John Sample.
So when the homeowner, John, called in the pros at Enviro King for a visual inspection, they weren't just relying on the naked eye. The licensed assessor brought in the big guns, things like infrared thermal imagers and highly sensitive moisture meters, literally hunting for the exact conditions where mold loves to thrive. And when you check out their executive summary, the red highlights really tell you the whole story. Suspected microbial growth and elevated spore counts detected right in the indoor air. This is that first major red flag that kicks off a much deeper scientific investigation.
Moving right along to Section 2, Analyzing the lab results, the invisible threat.
Seeing that gross stuff under the cabinet is one thing, but to wrap our heads around the true scope of this problem, we actually have to zoom way in to the microscopic level. Specialized air sampling is really the only way to quantify the invisible threat floating around the room. Let's decode some of the technical jargon from the report together. Environmental pros use a term called Condition 3. Basically, that means an indoor environment is contaminated with actual mold growth and spores. And here's the kicker. Actual growth includes mold that's active, dormant, visible, or, worst of all, completely hidden. Yeah, true mold growth doesn't even need to be visible to the naked eye to be a serious hazard to anyone living there. Check out this stark, data-driven contrast. If we look at the exterior air baseline, we see a totally normal, naturally occurring count of 1,330 spores per cubic meter. But then, look at the sample taken from inside the kitchen. We're talking about a massively elevated count of 13,790 spores, just multiplying inside the house. That right there is the hard data proving there is an active, hazardous situation going on indoors.
Which brings us to Section 3, Strict Remediation Protocols, the Battle Plan.
Now, I know those spore counts sound pretty alarming, but don't worry, we're shifting gears from the problem to the solution here. Knocking out a Condition 3 mold situation requires a highly engineered, intense action plan. And this incredibly precise floor plan brilliantly illustrates exactly how professionals map out the battlefield. You can see specific, targeted zones marked out. There's zones for flood cuts, which literally means cutting away and removing the contaminated lower sections of the drywall, and there are strict containment barriers. It really visualizes the massive scope of a project like this. You have to tear into walls, but at the exact same time, absolutely protect the rest of the uninfected house. So, to make absolutely sure no cross-contamination happens, the remediation process follows these incredibly meticulous steps. Step 1. Seal all the affected areas using thick 6mm plastic sheeting. Step 2. Install negative air machines. This makes sure air flows into the workspace, but contaminated air never accidentally blows out into the rest of the house. Step 3 involves painstakingly HEPA vacuuming and damp wiping every single surface. And finally, Step 4, encapsulating the newly exposed framing with an EPA-registered antimicrobial coating. It's basically a surgical strike against the mold.
Now, you just heard me mention HEPA, so let's quickly empower you by decoding that term. HEPA stands for high-efficiency particulate air. We're talking about an unbelievably powerful air filter that removes 99.97% of particles at just 0.3 microns in diameter. Honestly, these filters are the unsung heroes of the entire remediation process. They physically scrub those microscopic floating threats right out of the air.
But guess what? Even after all that intense scrubbing and tearing out drywall, the job still isn't done. The rebuilding phase doesn't just automatically start. First, you have to do a PRV, or post-remediation verification. This is a crucial, independent final inspection that verifies the structure has actually returned to a normal fungal ecology. It's essentially the scientific guarantee that the home is truly safe before a single new piece of drywall ever goes back up.
And that leads perfectly into Section 4, State Licensing Requirements. Who can you trust?
Now that we know just how severe the problem can be and how incredibly complex the cleanup is, who's actually legally allowed to do this kind of work? Because you definitely can't just hire a neighborhood handyman armed with a bottle of bleach. Under Florida Chapter 6131, the state explicitly splits mold professionals into two distinctly different, legally defined roles, all to protect you, the consumer. You have a mold assessor who investigates, takes the air samples, and writes up the scope of work. Then you have the mold remediator, who performs the physical tear-out, cleaning, and restoration. By legally separating the tester from the cleaner, Florida completely eliminates any conflict of interest. The company writing the expensive cleanup plan is never the one making a profit off doing the actual cleanup. Makes sense, right?
So the really crucial point here is the massive bureaucratic and educational hurdle the state puts up to shield you from fraudulent contractors. To get licensed by the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, you've got to pass a strict state-approved exam. You need a 2-year college degree in science or engineering or 4 full years of documented field experience. You have to carry at least $1 million in general liability insurance. On top of all that, you have to pass a fingerprint and background check and even provide proof of your good moral character. Believe me, they do not hand these licenses out lightly.
And what you're seeing here is the tangible, visual proof of those rigorous standards, an official State of Florida DBPR license certificate. When you're a homeowner in an absolute panic because you just found black growth spreading all over your pantry, you really need the peace of mind that the qualified help showing up at your front door has been heavily vetted by the state. That piece of paper is exactly what provides that assurance in a really chaotic situation.
Which leaves us with one final, provocative question to think about. If hidden spores were silently multiplying behind your walls right now, affecting the very air you breathe, would you know if the person you hired was truly qualified to stop them? Next time a disaster like this strikes, I want you to remember how absolutely crucial it is to demand those scientific reports, understand the containment process, and always verify their state credentials. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.